Dr. Carla Vorthak adjusted her bioscanner for the third time in 5 minutes, because apparently the universe had decided to mock her doctorate in xenobiology today. The readout kept showing the same impossible results from the small blue planet rotating lazily on her main viewer. "Zin, run the toxin analysis again," she called to her assistant, who was currently upside down trying to fix a malfunctioning sensor array. "And this time, don't let your tentacles get caught in the machinery." Zim Klaxon extracted himself from the equipment with a wet squelching sound that really didn't inspire confidence. "Already did, Doc. 5 times. The results are the same. This planet called Earth has more naturally occurring toxins than a vegan death swamp." Carla's 4 eyes widened simultaneously, which was quite the feat considering her species had evolved that particular expression specifically for moments of extreme disbelief. She'd been studying dangerous worlds for 30 galactic cycles, and nothing had prepared her for this biological nightmare. "Look at this list," she muttered, scrolling through the data. "Capsaicin, caffeine, theobromine, ethanol, nicotine. This isn't a planet, it's a chemical weapons facility that somehow developed an atmosphere." Zim peered over her shoulder, his eye stalks twitching nervously. "The concentration levels are off the charts too. The capsaicin compound could strip paint off a hull, and they have plants that produce it naturally just sitting there in the ground. What kind of evolutionary pressure creates this?" Carla wondered aloud, pulling up more data streams. The entire ecosystem is basically one giant death trap. No wonder we haven't detected any intelligent life down there. That's when the bioscanner started beeping frantically. "Oh no," Zim whispered, pointing at the display. "Doc, look at Sector 7 Alpha." The screen showed thermal signatures moving around the planet's surface in organized patterns. Structures, technology, cities. "By the sacred tentacles of Globnar," Carla breathed. "There are intelligent beings down there, living on that toxic wasteland." "But how?" Zim asked, his voice climbing to a pitch that made the ship's hull vibrate unpleasantly. "How do they survive? Are they immune to everything? Are they some kind of super-evolved species that feeds on poison?" Carla was already running calculations, her scientific mind racing through possibilities. Each one seemed more unlikely than the last. "We need to observe them. From a safe distance, a very, very safe distance." She began typing commands into the ship's navigation system, her claws clicking rapidly across the interface. "Set up long-range surveillance. I want every sensor we have pointed at that planet, but keep us at least 50,000 kilometers away. If these beings have survived in that chemical hell, they're either the most resilient species in the galaxy or completely insane." "What if they're both?" Zim asked cheerfully, because he had a talent for asking exactly the wrong questions at exactly the wrong time. Carla paused, her claws hovering over the controls. The thought hadn't occurred to her, but now that it had, she couldn't shake it. A species that could survive in a world full of natural toxins would be absolutely terrifying if they ever decided to leave their planet. "Zim, send a message to the Galactic Council. Tell them we've found something that requires immediate study, and maybe warn them that we might need to update our threat assessment protocols." As the prudent inquiry adjusted its position to begin surveillance, neither of them could have predicted what they were about to witness. Because sometimes the universe has a sense of humor that borders on the sadistic. Captain Blorg Hammerfist strutted onto the bridge like he was personally responsible for keeping the galaxy safe from cosmic threats, which, to be fair, he kind of was. His species had evolved from apex predators, and he wore that heritage like a badge of honor, complete with intimidating growls and unnecessarily dramatic gestures. "Dr. Vortak, report," he commanded, his voice booming across the bridge loud enough to rattle the coffee cups. Well, they would have been coffee cups if anyone on the ship had been crazy enough to drink stimulants. "Captain, we've discovered a planet with the highest concentration of natural toxins ever recorded," Carla began, pulling up her data on the main screen. "And it's inhabited by what appears to be an intelligent species." Blorg's eyes widened, and he instinctively reached for his sidearm. "Are they hostile? Have they weaponized these toxins?" "We don't know yet, sir. We're maintaining a safe observation distance while we study their behavior patterns. 50,000 kilometers, Zim added helpfully, which might not be far enough if they have projectile capability. The captain began pacing, which was impressive considering he had 6 legs and had never quite figured out how to coordinate them all while thinking. This could be a biological warfare scenario, a species that's developed immunity to toxins and uses them against other races. Sir, Kala interjected, I really think we should focus on observation before jumping to conclusions about nonsense. Blorg declared, striking what he probably thought was a heroic pose. We cannot allow a potential threat to galactic peace go unmonitored. Implement full quarantine protocols. No one goes near that planet without hazmat suits rated for Class X biological hazards. The bridge crew exchanged glances. Class X protocols were usually reserved for planets that had been bombed with chemical weapons or infected with plague. But arguing with Captain Hammerfist was like trying to teach quantum physics to a houseplant, so they began implementing the procedures. Sealing all air vents, announced the ship's engineer, Glorp Wrenchbender, whose species had evolved opposable thumbs on all 4 hands specifically for this kind of technical work, activating atmospheric filters, deploying emergency medical stations. Sir, Kala tried again, don't you think we might be overreacting? We haven't even confirmed that these beings are actually dangerous. Dr. Vortak, I've seen civilizations fall because they underestimated biological threats, Blorg replied, completely ignoring the fact that most of those civilizations had fallen because he'd accidentally blown them up during routine peacekeeping missions. We will not make that mistake here. The next hour was spent transforming the prudent inquiry into something resembling a flying hospital. Emergency medical equipment was deployed on every deck, decontamination chambers were set up at strategic points, and the entire crew was issued hazmat suits that made them look like they were preparing to explore the inside of a nuclear reactor. Long-range sensors are online, Zim reported, his voice muffled by his helmet. We're getting clear readings from the planet's surface. Excellent, Blorg said, settling into his command chair with the kind of satisfaction that usually preceded really bad decisions. To begin surveillance. I want to know everything about these creatures, how they move, how they communicate, and most importantly, how they've managed to survive in that toxic nightmare. The main screen flickered to life, showing a detailed view of the planet's surface. Cities sprawled across continents, vehicles moved along structured pathways, and thermal signatures indicated millions of life forms going about their daily activities. Remarkable, Kala whispered, her scientific curiosity overriding her paranoia for a moment. They've built a thriving civilization despite living in what should be an uninhabitable environment. Or because of it. Zim added ominously, maybe they used the toxins as building materials, or weapons. Or both. That's when the first shocking discovery hit them. The sensors detected one of the beings consuming something that registered as a Class C toxin. Then another being did the same thing. Then another. Are they eating poison? Glorp asked, his voice barely a whisper. The bridge fell silent, except for the humming of life support systems and the occasional beep from the sensor array. They watched in growing horror as more and more of the beings consumed various toxic substances throughout what appeared to be a routine daily activity. By the 7 moons of Zerlex, Captain Hammerfist breathed, they're not just surviving the toxins, they're consuming them voluntarily. Focus sensors on grid reference 47 Alpha, Dr. Vortak ordered, her voice tight with the kind of scientific fascination that usually led to terrible discoveries. There's a structure there with high concentrations of multiple toxins and significant life sign activity. The main screen resolved into a clear view of what the humans would have recognized as a perfectly ordinary coffee shop called Brutiful Morning. To the aliens, it looked like the epicenter of a mass poisoning event. Dear Cosmic Void, Zim whispered, his eye stalks recoiling as if the image itself was toxic. They're gathering in groups to consume the poisons together. It's some kind of ritualistic mass suicide. Through the coffee shop's windows, they could see humans sitting casually at tables, drinking from steaming cups and eating various pastries. The alien sensors were going crazy trying to catalog all the toxic compounds being voluntarily ingested. That liquid they're consuming, Kala said, checking her readings, it contains caffeine levels that would kill most species instantly. And they're drinking it like it's water. A young human woman entered the frame, approaching what appeared to be a distribution center for the toxic beverages. The aliens watched in mounting horror as she spoke to the being behind the counter. "I'll take a large coffee, extra shot, with chocolate syrup and whipped cream," she said cheerfully. By the tentacles of my ancestors, Glorp gasped from his engineering station. "She's requesting additional toxins. She's customizing her poison." The barista, a college student named Marcus who was completely unaware he was being observed by terrified extraterrestrials, smiled and began preparing the drink. The aliens' sensors detected caffeine, theobromine from the chocolate, and various other compounds that their databases classified as biological weapons. "This is getting worse," Zim reported, his voice climbing toward panic. "Another being just requested something called a mocha frappuccino with extra espresso shots. The computer can't even calculate the toxicity levels anymore. It just keeps flashing lethal dose exceeded in red letters." Dr. Vortak was frantically taking notes, her scientific training warring with her growing sense of dread. "The concentration levels are unprecedented. A single serving of that beverage contains enough stimulants to kill a vegan elephant, and they're consuming multiple servings." That's when they witnessed something that nearly broke their understanding of biology entirely. An elderly human man, who by all rights should have been dead several times over based on his apparent consumption history, calmly ordered a double espresso and a chocolate croissant. "He's combining toxins," Captain Hammerfist announced, his voice filled with the kind of awe usually reserved for watching supernovas. "Caffeine and theobromine together. That's not consumption. That's chemical warfare against his own biology." The man took a bite of his croissant and a sip of his espresso, then smiled contentedly and began reading a newspaper. The aliens watched in stunned silence as he showed no signs of distress, pain, or impending death. "Maybe they've developed some kind of rapid detoxification system," Kala suggested weakly. "Or maybe they've evolved immunity through constant exposure. Or maybe," Zim said in a voice that suggested he was questioning everything he'd ever learned about biology, "they actually enjoy it." The sensors suddenly detected something even more alarming. A group of humans was gathering around a table, and they appeared to be celebrating something. One of them produced a bottle containing what the ship's computer identified as ethanol, another compound that was classified as a Class C toxin. "They're sharing it," Glorp observed, his engineering mind trying to process what he was seeing. "They're passing around a container of poison and taking turns consuming it. And they're laughing." The humans were indeed laughing, clinking their glasses together in what was obviously some kind of celebratory ritual. The aliens could only stare as the beings voluntarily consumed a substance that would have dissolved their own internal organs. "Captain," Dr. Vortak said slowly, "I'm beginning to think our threat assessment might need to be revised." "Revised how?" Glorg asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. "Well, if these beings consume toxins recreationally, imagine what they might be capable of if they ever decided to weaponize their biology." The bridge fell silent as that implication sank in. Somewhere in the distance, the coffee shop's espresso machine hissed, sounding remarkably like the death wheeze of galactic peace. "Sir, we're detecting another gathering site," Zim reported, his voice already shaky from the coffee shop trauma. "This one has even higher concentrations of toxic compounds. The readings are, well, they're breaking our equipment." Captain Hammerfist leaned forward in his chair, which creaked ominously under his bulk, right on screen. The display revealed what humans would recognize as a bustling farmer's market, specifically the section devoted to hot peppers and spices. To the aliens, it looked like a marketplace for chemical weapons. "Sweet, merciful nebula," Dr. Vortak breathed, her scales turning a pale shade of green that indicated imminent nausea. "They're selling concentrated capsaicin compounds in the open. To anyone who wants them." The market was indeed a colorful display of peppers ranging from mild bell peppers to Carolina Reapers that could strip paint. Vendors called out to customers, proudly displaying their hottest varieties like they were selling fine jewelry instead of biological torture devices. "Look at that one." Glorp pointed at the screen with a trembling claw. "That human is examining what our sensors classify as a class of biological weapon. He's holding it with his bare appendage." The human in question, a middle-aged man named Bob, who grew ghost peppers as a hobby, was indeed casually handling what would have been considered a war crime in most galactic civilizations. He was explaining to another customer how to properly cultivate them for maximum heat. "The Scoville rating on this batch is around 800,000 units, Bob was saying cheerfully. "Perfect for making hot sauce." "Hot sauce," Zim repeated faintly. "They're processing weapons-grade toxins into condiments." That's when they witnessed something that would haunt their dreams for cycles to come. A promotional banner advertised something called the annual chili eating contest, and humans were actually lining up to participate. "They're competing," Captain Hammerfist said in a voice that suggested his worldview was crumbling. "They're turning toxin consumption into entertainment." The contest was beginning, and the aliens watched in growing horror as humans voluntarily consumed increasingly potent peppers. The contestants were sweating, their eyes were watering, and they showed obvious signs of distress, but they kept eating. "Why aren't they dying?" Kala demanded, frantically checking her instruments. "Those capsaicin levels should have dissolved their digestive systems by now." The current leader of the contest, a woman named Linda, who had been training for this moment all year, had just consumed what the alien sensors identified as a Carolina Reaper, logging in at over 2.2 million Scoville units. She was clearly in pain, but she was also smiling and giving thumbs up to the cheering crowd. "She's experiencing obvious physiological distress," Zim observed, "but her vital signs indicate she's not in danger of death. How is that possible?" "Maybe they've cybernetically enhanced themselves," Glorp suggested desperately. "Artificial organs that can process toxins safely." "No," Dr. Vortak said slowly, studying the biological readings. "But these are natural organisms. Completely organic. They've somehow evolved to not only survive these compounds but to actually seek them out." The contest reached its climax when Linda consumed something called a dragon's breath pepper, which registered toxicity levels that made the ship's computer emit a warning klaxon. The other contestants conceded defeat, and Linda was crowned champion to thunderous applause. "She won," Captain Hammerfist said numbly. "She won a contest to see who could consume the most biological weapons." "And look," Zim added, pointing at the screen. "They're giving her a trophy. They're celebrating her ability to consume toxins." The market was winding down for the day, but not before the aliens witnessed humans purchasing bags of various peppers to take home. Children were eating ice cream to cool their mouths after sampling milder varieties. Vendors were sharing recipes for incorporating the deadliest peppers into everyday meals. "Captain," Dr. Vortak said, her voice hollow with realization, "I think we need to reconsider our approach to this species." "How so?" "Well, if they consume class of biological weapons for fun, what exactly would they consider an actual threat?" The bridge fell silent except for the hum of life support and the distant sound of humans laughing as they shared stories about their favorite hot sauces. In the depths of space, the prudent inquiry increased its distance from Earth to a more comfortable 100,000 kilometers. "Just to be safe." "This is madness," Dr. Vortak declared, pacing across the bridge in her full hazmat suit. "We can't just sit here and watch an entire species slowly poison itself to death." Captain Hammerfist was reviewing the galactic regulations on humanitarian intervention, which was complicated by the fact that most of the regulations assumed the species being helped actually wanted to be helped. "The Prime Directive is clear," he said reluctantly. "We're not supposed to interfere with developing civilizations." "But this isn't development," Kala argued. "This is collective suicide by toxin consumption. We have a moral obligation to at least try to warn them." Zim, who had been monitoring the planet's surface, looked up from his console. The good news is their toxin intake seems to follow predictable patterns. They gather in specific locations at regular intervals to consume the poisons together. Social poisoning, Glort muttered from his engineering station. It's even worse than we thought. After several hours of debate, Captain Hammerfist made a decision that would go down in galactic history as either the most compassionate or most foolish act of his career. Dr. Vorthak, you and Zim will beam down to one of their toxin distribution centers, he announced, full hazmat protocols. Your mission is to establish contact and attempt to educate them about the dangers of their consumption habits. Sir, with respect, are you insane? Kala asked. Possibly. But I'd rather be insane than watch an entire species die from preventable poisoning. An hour later, Kala and Zim materialized inside Jake's bar and grill, a local establishment that the ship's sensors had identified as a major distribution point for ethanol-based toxins. Their environmental suits were rated for exploring toxic waste dumps, which made them somewhat conspicuous among the humans enjoying their evening drinks. Jake Brewster, the owner and bartender, looked up from cleaning glasses and saw two figures that appeared to be either exterminators or visitors from another planet. Given that it was Thursday night and he'd seen stranger things, he opted for friendly curiosity over panic. Hey there, Jake called out cheerfully. You folks here for the costume party? It's not until next week, but I appreciate the commitment to the theme. Kala stepped forward, her translator attempting to convert her species clicking and whistling into something resembling English. Greetings, indigenous life form. We are here to warn you about the dangerous toxins you are consuming. Jake raised an eyebrow. The what now? The ethanol, Zim added helpfully, pointing at the bottles behind the bar, and the caffeine, and all the other biological weapons you people seem to enjoy ingesting. Biological weapons? Jake laughed, which was not the reaction the aliens had expected. Buddy, this is just beer and coffee, maybe some whiskey if you're feeling fancy. Eh? You don't understand, Kala said urgently. These substances are classified as toxins. They can cause cellular damage, organ failure, and death. Jake looked around his bar, where several customers were enjoying their drinks and showing no signs of cellular damage or organ failure. Mrs. Henderson was on her third martini and was currently beating everyone at trivia night. College students were laughing over beers. A businessman was savoring a glass of wine while reading the news on his tablet. I think there might be some kind of misunderstanding here, Jake said slowly. These people aren't dying. They're just relaxing after work. But the toxicity levels, Zim protested, waving his scanner at a bowl of beer nuts. This should be lethal to organic life forms. Jake was beginning to understand that these weren't people in costumes. They were either aliens or the most committed method actors he'd ever encountered. Either way, they seemed genuinely concerned, which was oddly touching. Look, he said kindly, I don't know where you're from, but humans have been drinking alcohol for thousands of years. Our bodies process it just fine in reasonable quantities. To demonstrate, he poured himself a small glass of beer and took a sip. The alien sensors went crazy, registering what they considered a suicide attempt in progress. He's consuming it voluntarily, Kala whispered to Zim, right in front of us. And he's not showing any signs of distress. Jake noticed their obvious distress and felt a pang of sympathy. Tell you what, why don't you sit down and I'll explain how human metabolism works. You seem genuinely worried about us, which is sweet, but I promise we're okay. He gestured to the bar stools, then paused, just out of curiosity. Where exactly are you folks from? Kala and Zim exchanged glances through their helmet visors. This was not going according to plan. We're from far away, Kala said diplomatically. And where we come from, these substances would be considered extremely dangerous. Here, Jake said, genuinely interested. Different biology, I guess. That's fascinating. He reached under the bar and pulled out a small bowl of chocolate-covered espresso beans. Here, try some of these. They're my personal favorite. The aliens' hazmat suits nearly burst from the sudden spike in their heart rates. 3 days later, the crew of the Prudent Inquiry sat in their conference room, staring at a blank report template that seemed to mock their understanding of xenobiology. Doctor. Vortak's encounter with Jake had fundamentally challenged everything they thought they knew about toxicology, biology, and the basic nature of intelligent life. So Captain Hammerfist began, his voice heavy with the kind of exhaustion that comes from having your worldview completely shattered. How exactly do we explain this to the Galactic Council? Carla looked up from her notes, which consisted mostly of question marks and the phrase "How are they not dead?" written in increasingly frantic handwriting. We could start with the basic facts. We discovered a species that regularly consumes substances we classify as biological weapons. That makes them sound hostile, Zim pointed out, but they're not. They're actually quite friendly. Jake even offered to teach us how to make something called a margarita, which contains ethanol and citric acid. Glorp added unhelpfully, 2 toxins combined for recreational purposes. Captain Hammerfist rubbed his temples, trying to ward off a headache that had been building for 3 days. The Council is going to think we've lost our minds. How do we explain that an entire species has evolved to consume poisons for pleasure? Maybe we focus on the scientific implications, Kala suggested. Their metabolism is clearly different from anything we've encountered. They process toxins at a rate that suggests either incredible biological efficiency or some form of adaptation we don't understand. Or, Zim said quietly, maybe our definition of toxin is wrong. The room fell silent. It was the kind of silence that precedes either brilliant scientific breakthroughs or complete mental breakdowns. Explain, the captain said slowly. Well, we classify these substances as toxins because they're dangerous to us, Zim continued. But what if toxicity is species relative? What if what's poison to us is just food to them? Dr. Vortak began typing rapidly, her scientific mind finally finding a framework that made sense. Evolutionary adaptation. They developed on a planet with high concentrations of these compounds, so they evolved to not just tolerate them but to benefit from them. The caffeine could be an energy source, Glorp suggested, getting excited. The capsaicin might trigger beneficial biological responses. The ethanol could serve some metabolic function we don't understand. This is going to revolutionize xenobiology, Kala breathed. We've been classifying substances based on their effects on known species, but we never considered that other species might have completely different biological responses. Captain Hammerfist stood up, his military bearing returning as he processed the implications. We need to classify humans as a Class X species, but not because they're dangerous, because they're unprecedented. Actually, Zim said, pulling up his final report, I think they might be more dangerous than we thought, just not in the way we expected. How so? Peter? Well, if they can casually consume biological weapons, what would they consider actual threats? What would it take to actually hurt them? And more importantly, he paused dramatically, what if they decide to share their food with other species? The conference room fell silent again, as they all imagined the chaos that would ensue if humans started offering their harmless beverages and snacks to other galactic civilizations. The diplomatic incidents alone would be catastrophic. I'm filing this under extremely friendly but potentially hazardous due to cultural differences, Captain Hammerfist decided, and with a recommendation that all future contact be supervised by qualified xenobiologists. Dr. Vortak finished typing her report and leaned back in her chair. You know, there's one more thing we should consider. What's that? Jake invited us back any time. He said he'd love to learn about our culture and share more of theirs. She paused. He also mentioned something about a human tradition called a potluck dinner, where everyone brings their favorite foods to share. The implications of that statement hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Somewhere in the distance, the ship's computer chimed with an incoming message from the Galactic Council, requesting their preliminary report on the newly discovered species. Captain Hammerfist sighed and began typing. Council members, we have discovered a species that appears to be immune to biological weapons and considers toxin consumption a recreational activity. Recommend immediate reclassification of threat assessment protocols and possibly all of our understanding of chemistry. Also, they make something called coffee that might be the most dangerous substance in the galaxy. Request backup. Lots of backup. As the prudent inquiry continued its orbit around Earth, Jake was down in his bar, telling customers about the interesting visitors he'd had and wondering if they'd ever come back to try that margarita.